lo yiten le lo moit la tzadik moit la tzadik ve'ato Elokim to yeridem liv eir shachas ve'ato Elokim to yeridem liv eir shachas Anshei nafshi mikrov li ki berabim oyu imodi bodo vesholoi nafshi mikrov li Devorov me
Hi everybody. Firstly, thank you so much for joining our webinar. And I must tell you, yesterday, today is probably the most auspicious days in the Chabad calendar. It's called Rosh Hashanah, a new year for Chassidus. Now, you know, recently they discovered a vaccine to prevent and even cure COVID-19. And I want you to think about this. 200 years ago, the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, wrote a book called Tanya, which you're going to learn a lot about tonight. And this book can prevent and cure any spiritual and probably every physical sickness. Hear what I'm saying. The book is called Tanya, but to tell us more about the teachings of this book and why we're having this webinar tonight, we have 4 students of this book called Tanya. First, we're going to hear from Rabbi Ari Shishler. He's going to speak to us about our job in this world, how it's inspired by the book Tanya. That will immediately be followed by a very special guest from Minnesota, Rabbi Dr. Yosef Shugalov from Minnesota. He's a psychologist, he's a counselor, he's a rabbi. He deals with addiction, he deals with depression. But he's certainly going to share with us how Tanya can help us even master and overcome these terrible vices in life. And then we're going to hear from Rabbi David Weinberg. Rabbi David Weinberg is I say this cautiously, but an expert in Tanya based in Cape Town, Rabbi of the Marero Shul, but a great teacher of Tanya, and that will be followed by Rebbetzin Temi Hadar, who's going to give us a woman's perspective of how Tanya is so important in a woman's life. And without any delay, I'm now going to pass on to Rabbi Shishler. Thank you very much. Rabbi Shishler, over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Masinta, and shkoyach to you and the other organizers of tonight's event. A good Yom Tov, everybody. It's, as Rabbi Masinta said, an incredibly powerful day. And please God, we call on that power and we use it to propel ourselves forward to great things. So we're talking this evening, at least in this segment, about what is my job in this world. And I know some people here, then they already start to become a little bit nervous. Oh my goodness, my job. What kind of expectations? This is a rabbi speaking. I'm sure they're going to be tall orders, and there's probably some guilt associated with it. This is the point where people turn off their cameras and they kind of disappear off the Zoom, because who knows what it is that we're going to hear. And, you know, when you raise that question about what is my job in this world, a lot of people, I don't know how you are, but a lot of people feel, what is my job? Am I even significant in this world? There's 7 billion people out there. I don't know, the last few months during COVID, the traffic hasn't been what it usually is. But when you sit in the traffic in the morning, if you do sit in the traffic in the morning, you look to your right, you look to the left, everybody moving at a certain pace in a particular direction, you can kind of feel that we're lemmings of a sort, you know, we're just going about our business. And from a higher perspective, say the International Space Station, we're pretty insignificant, just going through the motions, doing our things. So why am I here? What is our job in this world? Did you ever have a teacher at school, as I suspect most of us did, who told you at some point in your school career, you know, you really have potential? Did you ever get that? Now, there's only one worse thing than having a teacher who tells you that you have potential, is when the teacher tells you that your child has potential. That's basically like a nice, kind of friendly, politically correct way of saying your kid is a lazy good for nothing and they're doing nothing of what they could be doing or what they could be achieving. I feel that very often when people approach Judaism, that's what they think Judaism says about them. You have so much potential. You could really be something, as if to say the underlying message is as if, well, you are not really doing any of that. You have this potential, but you haven't yet realized it. And it's almost like there's a bit of a new. I think the most powerful word that exists in any language, by the way, is new. Don't you think? How you can motivate people, new. So it feels like Judaism is all one big new. What are you going to do? What are you doing for this? Why are you here? We've got a phenomenal system where every single year we all gather together in shul on the high holidays, and it's this big collective new. So how poorly did you fail this time? How much of this great job that we have at keeping the world together, at being part and parcel of Hashem's great vision, how much of it are we actually doing? New, where are you? What are you doing? Not long ago, I had a conversation with an individual who's pretty well known in our community, but for whatever reason, I haven't had much to do with him in the past. And I called him and we had a conversation. It was a business-related conversation. He had a product and I needed the product. But in the course of the conversation, he felt the need to tell me, Rabbi, I am the goy in the family. There's a guy in our community, whenever he comes to shul, he says, Rabbi, the Shabbos goy is here. It's almost this impression that people have that somehow they're inadequate. Somehow a big part of being Jewish is feeling inadequate. Whatever the job is, as people will say, it's a small world, but I wouldn't want to have to clean it. Well, it's a small world and I wouldn't want to have to uplift it. And Jews are supposed to be the light unto the nations. And we're supposed to fulfill this grand divine mission. And we're supposed to do these incredible things. And it feels pretty overwhelming for many, many people. Which is why, and I once said this in the States, and I got into a lot of trouble. You know, when you speak to South African audiences, it's a pleasure, because whatever they think, they don't say. I mean, you know, everybody sits there, nods politely. Shkoyach, Rabbi, that was beautiful, Rabbi. You know, any questions at the end? Shtum, not a word, nothing. So I kind of made the mistake of thinking an American audience would be the same thing. And I got up and I made a joke. It was just a joke, and really, it was just a joke at the beginning of the presentation. And somebody took offense to the joke. They thought that it was belittling a particular kind of mental disorder. And all I was saying is that Jews seem to have a disproportionate amount of mental issues. Just seems that way. That's why we produced so many experts on anxiety, depression, stress, because it seems to be part and parcel of who we are. And no surprises, because we seem to carry the burden of the world on our shoulders. And when you ask the question, what is our job in the world? Everybody's thinking, ask him, don't ask me. I don't want to take this responsibility. You know, it's too onerous. Viktor Frankl, I think, was a pretty smart man. And he said that today our clinics and hospitals are filled with people who suffer from an entirely new malady, the sense of the ultimate meaninglessness of life. And I think it's pretty apt. You know, how many people feel, what is the purpose? It's all meaningless. So what do you do in life? You make a lot of money. Is that why we're here? To become famous, to have X amount of likes or X amount of followers? To become religious. I think that's what everybody expects the rabbis are going to say. You need to become religious. Ever hear the story of the person who went to the library and asked the librarian, please, could you direct me to the self-help section? And the librarian said, if I did that, it would defeat the purpose. And that's what it feels like, you know, as Jewish people. If you had to tell me how to do this, it defeats. So there's almost like a shame to ask, what is my job in this world? What am I supposed to be doing? The greater people, so much of our religious history is filled with these great individuals, giants. Who am I? I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. What am I going to achieve? It's fascinating that the cover page of the book of Tanya, a book that altogether revolutionized Judaism over the past 220 odd years, a book that once upon a time was learned in small groups of dedicated Chassidim, and today is learned in pretty much every yeshiva in the world and every walk of Jewish life, religious, ultra-religious, not religious. It's fascinating to what extent it's made a revolution. And you know what the cover page of the book says? Sefer Shel Beinonim. Now, once you dig your teeth into Tanya, you get a better perspective of what that means. But on the face of it, a book for the average individual. A book that speaks to the soul of you and I, ordinary folk, people who are not the stars of history, people who may never be recalled in history. Like the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle said that history is but the story of famous men. And by the way, he emphasized men. And I'm sure Rebbetzin Hadar will pick up on that later. Right? He emphasized the great men. They're the ones who made an impression on history. And we as Jews, we have this concept, Sefer Shel Beinonim. Judaism is a book and a philosophy that speaks to the average person. Or as the Hasidic saying goes, that Chassidus is designed to illustrate to a person how tiny the person is and how great the person could become. And whenever you hear about greatness, you go to the self-help section in the library, which today is effectively a whole series of TED Talks, because that's how you know that you're really on top of your game. Oh, I heard a TED Talk about something. Now I'm an expert. So in today's world, when people tell you that you have the potential for greatness, it's kind of like the teacher who patronizing, patronizing means talking down to people, right? So that's a joke. So the patronizing teacher who says to you, you have potential. That's a lot of what we feel like when the motivational speaker says you could be somebody, when the therapist tells you you have strength. Tanya says it's not that you could become somebody. It's not that you're tiny and you could become great. It tells you something about yourself that you never knew or imagined possible beforehand. They tell a story that there was once a fellow, every Jewish woman's nightmare. What happens if her husband comes back one day and decides that he's going to become an overnight ultra-religious freak? And it's happened to some really good people who we know, And so anyhow, there's this woman, and one day she says, my husband came home with this book called the Tanya, and she thought, oi, all I need is for my husband to bring a new Rebbe into my family. And a couple of years later, she said, I discovered that the Rebbe brought a new husband into my family. The perspective of Tanya to teach us what our job is in this world. It's not to teach us the job that we have to climb mountains and become like the great personalities of history. It's to help us to understand the greatness that we are and how to bring it to the surface. The Talmud tells us, now, most people translate that as, if a person, God forbid, kills one soul, it's like killing a whole universe. But the more literal translation is, anybody who allows a soul to go to waste, me'abed, gets lost. If you allow a soul to go to waste, you've allowed an entire universe to go to waste. Unfortunately, as Viktor Frankl said, so many people stare blankly into the face of the ultimate meaninglessness of life. The sense that my soul is wasted here on earth. I just go through the motions. I have a job. It's Groundhog Day. I don't know if you're allowed to say that. Ground, not kosher animal day. So, you get up in the morning, you do things on an ongoing basis. One day blurs into the next, and we don't actually make it me'abed nefesh. We kind of let the soul go to waste. You take this little book of Tanya, and it is a small book. Traditionally, the Tanya was always printed as a small book. Subsequently, it's been produced in all different forms and fashions. You take that small book and you discover in that small book a greatness of self that you never imagined. Because the opening line, the opening concept of Tanya is that this Benoni, this ordinary person, this individual who is really nondescript, this individual who has a Facebook profile that nobody even looks at, which of course is an indicator there must be a nobody, this individual has a core soul self, which is a piece of God. My job in this world is to bring that godliness that is me to the surface. We're about to celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah. It's no accident that Yutes Kislev, the celebration of the birth of Chabad Chassidus, and Hanukkah, probably the most celebrated holiday on the Jewish calendar, and that's because it doesn't require you to go to shul or not drive. So the two carry a similar theme. The theme, you light a little light, and the miracles begin to happen. Tanya tells you to light the lamp of your own soul, a lamp you already have, with oil that is already filled. And suddenly miracles begin to happen in your life, in your surroundings, and in the whole world. That's my job in the world. My job in the world is to recognize that I have incredible greatness within myself, not because I'm a big deal, but because I have an incredible, beautiful gift Hashem gave me, my own soul. When I feel it and touch it and let it come to the surface, miracles happen in my world, in the world around me. And that brings us to the greatest miracle of all, the miracle of Mashiach, which, please God, as it says in the approbation to Tanya by Reb Zusha Vanipoli, the book of Tanya will take us to Mashiach. Please God, these teachings will take us straight, directly to Mashiach. And in the moments left until then, take a Tanya, get involved with a shir, learn it. You will find you don't bring a new Rebbe into your home, you bring a new you into your life. I think I'm supposed to pass the baton on to you, Rabbi Dr. Shagalov.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you, Rabbi Shishler. You obviously are a pulpit rabbi, something which I am not. And that was a beautiful, beautiful talk. And I am myself inspired, but you also stole a lot of the thunder of what I wanted to say. Fortunately, I still have a few things left. I first of all want to begin by thanking the people who put this all together for giving me the opportunity to present today. It is an honor for me. As I stand here, as I sit here and look into the abyss of my camera and don't see anybody in front of me, I think about South Africa and my visit to South Africa actually this year in February. We had the great opportunity to stay by Rabbi David Weinberg, see the shul which you spoke about, and see the beautiful community of South Africa, specifically as Cape Town. What a beautiful opportunity that was. Just a couple of weeks later, the whole world came down with COVID and myself too. Thankfully, HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed me and my family, and I'm healthy and well. I'm not sure why I was chosen to speak here because it's quite difficult for me to talk to a big audience. As a therapist, I'm used to speaking to individuals, not speaking to multiple people. And so I will imagine myself talking to each and every one of you individually. Today is Chof Kislev. Today is the second day of the Yom Tov, which we celebrate, of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, being freed from prison. But what we are also celebrating, I believe, is we're celebrating the gift which the Alter Rebbe gave to the world, and in turn the Baal Shem Tov himself, who was the leader of the Hasidic movement. And that gift was the gift of positivity. And what I mean by that is, when we take a look at the story of the Torah begins with the failure of man. It starts with the story how God created Adam, God created man, and he failed. He messed up. This is the story the way we classically see it. And since then, we have been climbing our way back to success. This is the way the world sees the story of the Torah, as us as humanity struggling back from our biggest failure to become righteous again and to become whole. But the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov and the Tanya teaches us that this is not right. This is not the way to look at the legacy of mankind. This is not a struggle from failure to success, because the fact that man sinned was destined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was destined by God. This is actually the plan for man. The plan for man is to struggle with his humanity, but not to overcome his humanity, because to overcome his humanity would make him into an angel. God has enough angels and he doesn't need any more. The journey, the challenge of man is to beautify that struggle, to recognize that the fact that he is human, the fact that he is part animal, and the fact that he's part God is how God made him. And this is the most beautiful thing which man can do. By turning that most human part of him, that most animal part of him, and directing it and making it into something godly. And I think the Alter Rebbe begins with this, and begins the Sefer HaTanya. He begins the Sefer HaTanya with this struggle. And he starts off by saying that a man, human being, a Jew, is created before the soul even comes down. God says to him, you will be a tzaddik, you should be a tzaddik, and you should not be a rasha. You should be a tzaddik, means a righteous man, and not a rasha, not an evil man. Because by nature, we can be either one of those. And as Rabbi Shishler said it so beautifully, that there's both of those within us. There's the mundane, there's the animal part of us, and there's the holy part of us, and it's the two parts of the human being. But as human beings, whenever there's expectation, there's always depression. Because as soon as we have an expectation, tihi tzaddik, that our job is to be righteous and to be a great person, immediately with that comes expectation. And as we know, one of the formulas given for depression is the difference between accomplishment and expectation. When our expectations are very high and our accomplishments in our eyes seem very low, that is the source of depression. Inversely, what is happiness Happiness is the correlation between accomplishment and between expectations. When we have expectations and our accomplishments come close to that, then we feel happy, we feel content. The struggle of anybody who is going to try and become better on a daily basis will ultimately cause them to have some depression, because the depression is a sign when they feel like they have not accomplished what they've set out to reach. Depression is something today which is pervasive all over the place. One of the reasons for that is simply because wherever we go, we're faced with models, we're faced with other people's success. You often, if you ever go on Facebook or you go online, you don't see the lousy pictures of people. You see the best pictures of people. We see the best of other people. And what we have learned to do is to compare the worst of ourselves to the best of other people. And because of this, it creates in us a feeling of depression, a feeling of anxiety. Now, I want to be clear before I go on that there are two kinds of depression which we talk about. There's what we call the kind of chemical depression, or what I would call more the diagnosis of depression, and more of a situational depression and anxiety. As human beings, we have lots of feelings. We feel happiness, we feel sadness, and sometimes for moments we get depressed when we see how much there is to accomplish, and we feel useless. That's more of a situational depression. But there's also clinical depression, which happens to us simply because we've been overwhelmed by circumstances in our environment. Physiological stress overtakes us and we become depressed. It's the same thing with anxiety. We all experience anxiety. Some anxiety is healthy. Some anxiety even drives us. We get up in the morning, we succeed because we have anxiety, we have concern pushing us. But both depression and anxiety can become a clinical problem when they become overwhelming. When that is really a problem, Tanya is not the book for you. When that happens, it's time for you to go to see your local doctor, your local therapist, and to talk to them and to get professional help. In Judaism, we see the recognition of mental health just as important as physical health. We see this in the Misha Berach, which we make in shul every day for somebody who is sick. And we say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bring that person, God should bring that person, refuas hanefesh and refuas haguf, should heal his soul and heal his body. But when it comes to the day-to-day anxiety, when it comes to the day-to-day depression, which we struggle, specifically us as Jewish people who are trying to live a life of purpose. As Rabbi Shishler said, the Tanya is a beautiful book. It is the path to be able to serve Hashem with joy. What the Alter Rebbe shows us is that it's not becoming a tzaddik. It is not becoming a perfect person, where lies the joy and lies the success of our efforts. However, what the Alter Rebbe tells us is that we become hopeless because we feel every day the mundaneness of our life. Every day we feel, however hard we try, we see the struggles, we see the difficulty of holding on to godliness because we see the selfishness of ourselves. We see the lowliness of ourselves. We see the struggles, the temptations, the interests and the drives, which are so prevalent in us. And so we feel we have not succeeded. And the Alter Rebbe says, if the purpose of man was to become a tzaddik, then it is true, we have not succeeded. But God has not created us to become a tzaddik. God has created us to watch that struggle. It is not a struggle to become something. It is a struggle to make the right choices day to day. As we wake up in the morning and we find and we come face to face with the real humanness of ourselves, and the real humanness of ourselves is our temptations, our selfishness, the fact that we struggle every day, and the fact that we have the ability to overcome it and make a right choice. The Alter Rebbe tells us, not only is this beautiful to us, not only is this something which we should be happy that we were able to overcome it, but God appreciates that struggle. and our ability to make the right choice in the day as the most beautiful gift there is, even greater than the work of the Sadiq. Because the righteous man who does no wrong doesn't know what wrong is. He doesn't have to choose between two things. And so what the Alter Rebbe has shown us, that when we as people focus on the imperfections of ourselves and choose to make a choice which is the right one, that should give us joy, that should give us happiness. The Alter Rebbe goes on to say that depression, when we start to want to be something which we are not, says depression and sadness is even worse than the sin itself. When a person starts to think, what am I anyway? I can't achieve anything, then suddenly there's no difference between righteousness and between sin. When a person starts to say, it makes no difference anyway because I cannot achieve, I cannot be a righteous person, it gives him license to give up. And when he has license to give up, he'll do whatever he can. He'll do whatever he wants. But when a person realizes that his beauty and the specialness and the way out of his despair is not by becoming something which he is not, but by recognizing who he really is and choosing the better side of himself over the worse side of himself on a daily basis. This is not a struggle which we choose once and we win it and the battle is over. This is a battle and this is a challenge which we have every day of our lives. And the Alter Rebbe tells us, some days we will win this battle and some days we will lose this battle. But it's not a battle which we win by achieving. It's a battle which we win on a day-to-day basis. If I have accomplished it today, I am a happy person. If I have not been able to accomplish it today because today I made a mistake, then I know at least tomorrow I have an opportunity to do this again. It is a very real and it is a very achievable struggle which we have. And the struggle is, as Rabbi Shishler said, that instead of becoming depressed because of who we are, which is something us to become happy for who we are, because we have given this struggle, and because we can overcome it, and because even in our mundaneness, we can still hold on to what is godly. We don't have to give up being mundane to be able to taste godliness. We don't have to let go of who we are to be able to experience God. We are who we are, and that's not going to change. But the Tanya teaches us that even with all that despair with the world around us, even with all that anxiety, there's a time when we can let that aside and we can find the strength within us, we can find the godliness within us, and to embrace it and to remember that that's just as much a part of who we are as the other side. I work with addicts. And one of the things which addicts realize early on is that they're never going to be 100% cured. As everybody has heard, if you watch the movies, you know that when you go to group, one of the things addicts say is, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm an addict. But there's a lot of joy in that. The joy is the daily struggle that they were able to overcome, and they were able to show the side of their humanity over the other side which they struggle with. And it's the same thing for all of us. We are all in our own way addicts. And as we think about that, that is an opportunity and ability for us to see, to step out from beyond the despair of our daily life and recognize that there's also joy. Every time we succeed in a challenge, we need to know that it should bring us joy, not to compare ourselves to somebody else, but to compare ourselves to the other choice which we could have made. Thank you. Now I guess I'm going to have to pass it on to the next person, but I don't know who that is.
Weinberg.
Thank you very much. I'm just in a setting. Give me a moment here. Okay. with Zoom, sometimes the place you thought you can start off your talk ends up not to be the place you can actually talk. So my apologies for that. I'll be able to return to my original space soon. But hearing so much about all the struggles, it sounds like one of my kids who play this video game, Call of Duty. You know, they Call of Duty. They're a whole day playing these war games, and they're fighting their way through life. It sounds like such a like the poor Tanya has been relegated to the trenches, and to follow on from such speakers like Rabbi Shishler and Rabbi Dr. Shagalov is truly an honor and a challenge. So I want to take you back into the trenches. In the wonderful book Samarkand, written by Rabbi Hillel Zaltzman, about the experiences of Jewish living behind the Iron Curtain and sacrifice, he shares a moment, I think it was the early 50s or late 50s, when they were visited in Samarkand, far out in the steepies, in the edges of Russia. They were visited by a great general in the Hasidic army of Judaism behind the Iron Curtain, Reb Berel Chaim, Berke, as he was known, Reb Berke. Reb Berke had sat in the Gulag for the sin of teaching Torah and perpetuating Judaism. He had been tortured, interrogated, and suffered terrible deprivations. And eventually he was freed in 1953 when Stalin died and many political prisoners were released. He made his way all the way to the far edges of Russia, to Samarkand, where he had to hide behind a wall to be able to hear a Baruch Hu Baruch Shema, to say Amen, to hear a davening and a Baruch Hu. And there he actually lived behind walls of different people's homes in secret so that he can keep living his Yiddishkeit. He only came out at night. One of the things that Rebbe shared with these, he was a child then, and Hillel, and he heard the story from Rebbe, this great soldier, a story that they had encountered when he was in interrogation. Was that one of his interrogators, who were Jews, they were from the Jewish section of the Communist Party, and they were virulently anti-Jewish. And this interrogator says to him, "I found your weapons. You can't hide from us anymore. I have discovered your weapons." Berke thinks to himself, "Are you crazy? What weapons? I never held a weapon in my life. What libel are they going to concoct about me now?" And then the interrogator proceeds to pull out the book of Tanya. And he says, "We found this in your home. We know that this is giving you the strength to fight Mother Russia, to fight communism." And the question I think that we're trying to understand today on Chof Yutes and Chof Kislev, the great Yom Tov and the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, is what is it about Tanya that has given the Jewish people this tremendous tool in our arsenal to fight under any condition, to fight deprivations and anti-Semitism, Tsarist days, and the poverty then, to fight the anti-Jewish attacks and persecution of communism, and to fight assimilation in the years of plenty in the last 70 plus years, where Jews have never had it better. In each situation, Tanya has had the ability to face these challenges and give the reader and the person who is learning and living it a koyach, a strength to somehow fight back. And the question is, what is it about Tanya that does that? We've heard tremendous qualities of Tanya. We've heard that you can discover what it is about life that you need to do and how you fulfill your purpose. We've heard about how it measures and creates a realistic understanding of our expectations versus our achievements, which is so crucial in battling this epidemic of depression. How does Tanya do that? So one of my Tanya Shiurim classes that I have with a few young guys, I got this wonderful question as we finished just a few weeks ago, chapter 4. We finished chapter 4, and Josh says to me, "So Rabbi, what else is there? This is it. There's another 49 chapters to this book." He says, "This has given me everything I need to know. What else can the Tanya be addressing that I would need to actually deal with in my life?" I was absolutely, I was so overwhelmed by that question, because clearly he'd been given a new picture of life. He learned about the concepts of Sadiq as a qualitative, unique individual that we're not going to reach. He learned about the Beinoni, the individual in the trenches that each one of us can relate to. He learned about the godly soul that each one of us has within us, burning brightly and yearning to be expressed. He learned about the 10 powers of the godly soul. He learned about the garments and the way that it can express itself. And he said, what else do I need? And I think that the answer to that question gives us the ability to understand the uniqueness of Tanya. What else indeed is there beyond that picture? And the answer is that when you're sitting in a godly space, in a good space, in front of a Sefer Tanya, or in shul, or in front of your siddur davening, or in middle of doing a good deed where you're feeling completely holy and transformed and elevated, there is nothing else that you need. But the reality, as we've heard so beautifully and powerfully from the last two speakers, is that that's not the sum total of the picture of life we deal with. Life as we deal with is a world of complexity. Whereas the Alter Rebbe introduces in the first chapter, there's an animal soul that wants to express itself, that needs to somehow constantly find its own self-expression. And it constantly demanding more and more and more. The reality that we do is that there is a struggle between this godly space that we can occupy, and we do occupy sometimes on a daily basis and in unique times and holidays and in shul or spaces. And the reality that we have to when we go into the world. So if we were just a godly soul, chapter 4 would be enough. But we need chapter 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 to learn about the opposition, to understand what it is that we're dealing with and who it is that we're fighting against, and how do we actually deal and engage with that opposition in the healthiest way possible. It's well known that a theme of Yutes and Chav Kislev are the words in Tehillim 55, Pada b'shalom nafshi. King David says to God, you have redeemed my soul in peace. The very multitudes who had been against me are now with me. A transformation of the opposition into a support. If we look at Kabbalah and the stages of Kabbalistic development, you can generally break it down into 3. You look at the revelation of the Zohar taught by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century, which taught us and brought down into our world and into our ability to communicate ideas of such depth, such spirituality, such esoteric terms and definitions, that it had a huge impact on Torah study from that point. However, it was fragmented. Ideas that didn't really coalesce into one bigger picture. 1400 years later, in the 16th century, we were gifted with the Arizal. Rabbi Yitzhak Luria lived in Tzvat, who in a short time presented a partzuf, a face, a comprehensive, complex understanding of all these ideas, so that suddenly they meshed into one healthy whole. Suddenly these fragmented ideas weren't fragmented at all. They were actually part of one picture, and they made sense, and they fit into a deeply complex system as he was able to present them. And he was so overwhelmingly accepted in the entire Torah world with the picture that he was able to present. 200 years later, the Baal Shem Tov and the founding of Chassidism took the ideas of Kabbalistic, the biology of God, and the face which was created in such a beautiful way by the Arizal, and presented it in our integration with the world. The world is not your enemy. All that fragmentation you deal with out there, all those challenges and the different spaces that you occupy are not different at all. They're all part of one seamless whole. The Baal Shem Tov taught Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, meaning that God is intimately involved in every single thing that happens in the entire universe, not just with humanity. Every single detail is dictated and expressing the will of God, and more importantly, fulfilling the purpose of creation. A blade of grass blowing in the wind helps and contributes to the purpose of creation itself. And then the spiritual grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, wrote the Tanya. And in the Tanya, he's given us a face, a system that shows us that the human consciousness, the human reality, humanity and all its inner complexities are in fact not fragmented. They are not in different spaces. They are absolutely one unified whole. Both the parts that we like and we admire and we're happy to put on Facebook, as Rabbi Shagalov said, and those parts that we would rather keep to ourselves. They are part of one face. They are part of one system. And the Alter Rebbe teaches us, and this is what I told my friend Josh, the Alter Rebbe is going to teach you how to negotiate and how to navigate and how to actually teach your animal soul, those instincts that you're not particularly proud of, how that it too can intellectually come to appreciate that it should be wanting more godliness in its life, that it should be leaning more towards a mitzvah than the opposite, more towards a godly space than the opposite. And that is part of the journey, as we heard earlier. They're not fragmented realities, one that we're happy to be in and the other a detour of life. They are in fact one seamless picture, one whole. In yesterday's reading, Parshas Vayishlach on Yutes Kislev, we read how Yaakov Avinu had crossed over a river, and he ended up alone, where he engaged with the angel of Esau in a terrible struggle, which ended up with him overpowering the angel and the angel wanting to leave. What was Yaakov doing there? Rashi tells us, Pachim Ktanim, that he left behind small jugs and he went back to fetch them. You can ask yourself, Yaakov was a fabulously wealthy individual. He speaks of his own wealth as he pleads with God for protection. He's done really, really well. Yaakov is facing an enemy of Esau. He needs to go back and cross over for a few jugs. Leave the jugs behind. You'll find more jugs. But I think that the Alter Rebbe and Tanya would tell us that, in fact, what Yaakov knew is that there is no incidental or inconsequential part of my life. Every element of my life, even those minor little jugs that have no obvious great contribution to my greater reality and picture, serve a higher purpose. And you can't simply discard them. You can't simply let them go. When you see them as part of this complex system, when you see them as part of the face of your purpose in life, of your deliberate living every day, there is no happenstance, and they have to be captured and brought back too. And that is what Yaakov, in fact, does. He struggles with that angel, and eventually that dark angel wants to leave. And hey, if your dark angel wants to leave, you bid him adieu. You say goodbye. Thank you very much. It was very nice to see you, but I'm glad you want to go. What does Yaakov say? No, I won't let go of you. You have to first bless me. Let's see what you're blessing from the guy for. He wants to leave. Darkness is leaving. The dawn of light is coming. Say goodbye. No. Yaakov wants to bring and recognizes that negativity can also be drawn in, can also be captured, is also part of a higher purpose in fulfilling what Hashem wants, revealing godliness in this world and fulfilling our purpose. There is no incidental part, even the darkness that we have to struggle with. Last year, one of the great bards, Jewish bards, passed away. So I did some research to understand a little bit more about Leonard Cohen, and I came across a line in one of Leonard Cohen's songs that really spoke to me, and I think speaks to this idea. And that is, he says, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Friends, every single aspect of our life, technology, struggles, work, inner complexities, inner contradictions, all the demands on us are all part of one seamless whole. They are part of one partsuf, one face. And by embracing them and learning how to deal with them, we are able to fulfill our purpose and bring about the promise of the Tanya, which is an era of Mashiach very speedily. I now hand over to Rebbetzin Temi Adar.
Thank you. It's a tough act to follow from these great speakers, but let's see how we go. I was teaching a class of teenagers about 5 years ago, and we were talking, I think it was about Shabbos. One of the students in the back of the classroom raised their hand and he said, "So do you get kares if you don't do this?" And I paused. This was a room full of students who had minimal knowledge and were, for the most part, not, observant of Torah and mitzvot. And so, using the age-old teacher trick of when you don't know the answer, throwing the question back at the student, I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, is this like the stuff that you really have to do, otherwise you get cut off from God?" So I paused. I had no idea where he had even picked up that term from. And in fact, at the time, I actually had no idea which mitzvahs precisely one gets cut off, their soul gets cut off from God from. I mean, I know the general idea, but in my entire life of being raised of a life filled with mitzvahs and Torah, kares, my soul being cut off from God, was an abstract ideological idea. And I had never, ever in my whole entire life, not then and still not now, I had never factored into my decision-making of whether or not to do a mitzvah. I had never factored in this idea of kares, of punishments, of reward. And so I began an entirely different discussion in my class that day, not about Shabbos, but why do we do mitzvahs? And what kind of relationship with God are we supposed to be having? And what are the purpose of mitzvahs? And I realized that the language that I was born with, my mother tongue to relate to God, was foreign to most of them. Even if on the exterior it seemed similar. We both knew words like Shabbos and kosher and Torah and mitzvahs and Yom Kippur and all that kind of stuff. But the entire lens that I was looking at these mitzvahs was completely different. What I took for granted, what I thought everybody knew, I realized was an incredible gift, a gift that Chassidus gave me, a way of looking at the world that the Alter Rebbe laid out in the Tanya. And it's often a gift that we take for granted. We think perhaps everyone has these glasses to look at the world. I was talking to my sister about this recently, and she was telling me that in her shluchas, she works with many people who have left the ultra-Orthodoxy lifestyle that they were brought up with. And she said, sometimes in high school or as a kid, I looked at Chassidus as lines of Tanya that we had to memorize or things to study to do well on a test for. And she said that her shluchas, what she's most grateful for, what it taught her is that she realized that she took Chassidus for granted. And sometimes it seemed a bit lofty and abstract and like these ideas of God and the different levels of God and different worlds. And she said, but when I share these basic beliefs of Chassidus, these ideas that I live with every single day of my life, to people, they are blown away. And sometimes we could get distracted by the deep Kabbalistic insights and lose ourselves in them, and we don't realize that the Tanya is the ultimate self-help book. In the last few years, there's been an explosion of self-help and pop psychology books and podcasts and speakers, and every other post on my social media feed seems to be an inspirational meme with hashtags like live your best life and be grateful. And my favorite, mindfulness. And sometimes I read these things and I get inspired, and then I remind myself, I have the ultimate self-help book. The Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya as a guide for how to be the best versions of ourselves. And for me, whenever I find myself lost in doubt and confusion about who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing, which is more often than I would like, I remind myself of the Tanya's teachings. And the first thing I always remind myself is that it's possible for me to be close with Hashem, that Hashem is waiting for me. Hashem is waiting for me to create a meaningful relationship with God. And before anything, I remind myself that Hashem loves me and Hashem is waiting for me. And I think about meditation. I used to think meditation's not for me. I know lots of New Age people and thinkers, and meditation factors big into their life. But women are master meditators. And I bet every single person here has meditated. Because what does it mean to meditate? It means to think about something so strongly that it causes an emotional or physical change or reaction within us. And when was the last time you worried about something so much that you actually had a physical reaction? Your stomach felt sore, your head hurt. That's meditation. We're just thinking about the wrong things. And the Tanya takes us on a journey of self-discovery and teaches us how our brain and our soul and our emotions and behaviors are wired together, and what we need to be thinking about to create an emotional reaction to Hashem. And that's incredible. And the Alter Rebbe tells us that what we should think about and what will change everything in our lives is that how Hashem, in the very beginning of Tanya, how Hashem is around us and in everything and fills everything, and even our greatest problems are completely insignificant compared to God. And we need to think about it and not just know it. We might know that God is everywhere. But the Alter Rebbe is asking us not just to know it, but to make it personal, to ask ourselves, how does this idea make me feel? And everything we learn, the Tanya tells us, needs to become part of you. We need to ask ourselves, what does this make me feel? What emotion does this idea bring out? And that's more natural for women. And this brings me to the next teaching that I think about often. Mitzvahs are, the Tanya writes, a hug with Hashem. They're an opportunity to embrace God. It's not about every time I do a mitzvah, it's not because I'm scared of a punishment or I'm trying to get a reward. It's because I want to get close with God. And the buzzword of today is mindfulness and being present. And that's the entire message of the Tanya, that we could live with intention every single moment. And for me, which is also really important for me, is an idea in the Tanya that our thoughts are not always a reflection of our essence. Not everything I think is who I really am, because sometimes I can think these crazy or irrational ideas, and I remind myself, that's not really me. And every act we do is extraordinary. And as women, we have a unique ability to create spiritual energy around us. And when we look at Torah and mitzvahs, do we look at mitzvahs as a gift, as Torah as an opportunity to become one with God? Or is it a set of rules that we need to follow so we don't get punished? One of my favorite teachings of the Tanya, I think, is at the end of chapter 3. And it reminds us that we need to connect with great spiritual leaders, not because they are so great and we should be inspired by their greatness, but because they are more in touch with our source, the essence of Hashem, and they remind us of our own source and of how great we can be. Women have a unique appreciation for Chassidus because women were created with the same spiritual energy that God used to create the rest of the world, the level of Malchus. When God went through a series of contractions to be able to take his infinite energy and create and relate with finite beings, both spiritual and physical, God contracted himself in a series of 10 contractions. And the last contraction, when God had finally created enough space for an entire physical world, was the level of Malchus. And that same spiritual energy is also the spiritual energy of the feminine. So our souls, female souls, intuitively tap into the spirituality that is innate within every atom of creation. The Tanya reminds us of how we have the opportunity through our behavior to tap into spirituality and uplift it, not through fame or fortune, but through small moments in time, moments of spiritual fusion that we sometimes call mitzvahs. We are insanely powerful, and the Torah reminds us of that every single day. And the last lesson that I try and carry with me all the time is that other people are not in competition with us. They are merely an extension of ourselves. Our left hand doesn't grab food out of our right hand because it's all the same. And that's how we need to look at other people. Every day I remind myself of these teachings. And I'm very, very far from being successful. But luckily, the Tanya allows for mistakes because every single second is an opportunity for a moment of perfection. I might have failed yesterday and I might even fail tomorrow. But right now, this second, I just have to ask myself, like the Tanya asks us, is there something good you could be doing right now? Is there a mitzvah to be done? An opportunity to hug God, to create a spiritual fusion of the spiritual and physical? And if there is that opportunity, and there always is, then that's what I must do. That is what we need to be doing. And that's the message of the Tanya for us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Shishler, you mentioned at the beginning of your talk that you, the story of the fellow who brought home the Tanya, and his wife realized years later that the Tanya brought their family a new husband and father. And I think in your very special way, with your wisdom and insight, you brought us a new Yitas Kislev. So thank you, Ari. I'm here officially to be, the instruction I was given by Rabbi Masinter was to thank everyone on behalf of the listeners. But I haven't heard yet, I mean, there are a few beautiful comments, but I haven't heard yet from all the listeners, but I can speak for myself. Rabbi Shishler, that really touched me, so thank you. Rabbi Dr. Shagalov, you started off your speech with reference to today's Tanya. Well, indirectly, when you said it's hard for you to speak to such a large audience, and you're a therapist and you're used to speaking one-on-one. The Alter Rebbe starts off Tanya with the same question that you started off with. But he continues, that I'm writing the Tanya because I know you personally. He says to every single one of us individually. And I think you did that very beautifully as well. That Rebbe Rashab says that learning Tanya is having a conversation with the Alter Rebbe. And if you were speaking tonight just for me, your words were worthwhile for that alone. So thank you. To my dear Chaver and local Cape Townian, that David, your grandfather is, of course, the legendary pioneer of bringing Tanya to the wider world, followed on by your fathers and uncles who translated his work into English. But you're definitely bringing it home to South Africa, continuing the shlichus of bringing Chassidus here, and you definitely gave us the much needed lift, Yasher Koyach. And finally, Rebbetzin Hadar, you really taught us to appreciate what we have. And although all the gifts that you mentioned of what Tanya has given you are gifts that we know, the way you highlighted them with such depth and intuition brought, I think, all of our speakers together in a very powerful way. And so I just want to end off with sharing with you the gift that I got. It was about 30 years ago. This was a gift of the Tanya that was given to me by the Rebbe in my hand. But I don't want to end off in that respect. I want to give it forward. And anybody here who does not yet have a copy of Tanya, I or any one of the Chabad rabbis or Rebbetzins across South Africa have a copy of the recently published first 12 chapters of Tanya with the Hebrew and the beautifully retypeset and reformatted English translation and commentary from the Rabbis Weinberg for you. So please do get in touch with us. And as we say at the beginning of the Yom Tov and at the end, we should all be inscribed and sealed for a good year in the study of Chassidus, in the study of Tanya, in the ways of Chassidus, in the coming together as this Farbrengen was. I'm sure in just a moment, Rabbi Masinter will bring back up onto the screen the advertisement for the Farbrengen. This was more of a talk where we had really 4 incredible speakers give us wonderful gifts for Yitzhak Kislev. And we can, please God, through the Farbrengen, bring it to life and to spirit into the year ahead. Good Yom Tif and L'chaim.
I'd just like to remind everybody of the fact, once again, that Thursday night is Hanukkah, and you have the unique opportunity to bring light to yourselves, to your homes, to the street out there, and to everybody around you. And in that light, Chabad House, certainly around the country, is very, very happy and proud to be able to share that light and enable everybody to have a menorah of their own. If you would like to get a menorah, or you know people who need, please be in touch with your local Chabad House as soon as possible, because we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to light menorah for the entire duration of Hanukkah. Of course, in Johannesburg, there will be public menorah lightings taking place at Sandton City, at Kosher World, at the Norwood Mall. Please join in. Some of them are going to be on Zoom. Of course, it's already now COVID-20. It was COVID-19 because I think it was named after December 19. Can you believe it's already a year that's gone by? So perhaps the celebrations won't be that physically involved, but of course, as we've always learned in Chassidus, and the Rebbe always taught, that the idea of the light of the menorah is something far more spiritual as well as very, very practical, to bring light into the dark spaces, and as Rabbi Weinberg referred to them, being able to get through those cracks. So hopefully it will be a great and wonderful lit up Hanukkah with the ultimate bracha of being able to see the light of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, please God, very, very soon.